Sit down, dear, on the bed. Sit down, Mr. Ember. Sit down, Professor. A moment of silence. Poetry and philosophy must brood while beauty and strength. Your apartment is nicely heated, Mr. Ember. Now, if I were quite sure that you two would not try to get shot by the men outside, I might ask you to leave the room while Miss Butterfin and I remain here for a brisk business conference. I need it badly. No, Ling, no, said Miss Butterfin. Let us get moving. I am sick of this place. We'll do it at home, honey. I think it is a beautiful place, muttered Gustav reproachfully. It is so, said Ember. In fact, these mirrors and rugs suggest a certain tremendous oriental sensations which I cannot resist. It is compliment so, said Ember, and began to weep. Pretty Miss Butterfin took her boyfriend firmly by the arm, and after some coaxing, he was made to convey Ember to the back police car waiting for them. When they had gone, Ivan became hysterical, produced an old bicycle from the attic, carried it downstairs, and rode away. Krug locked the apartment and slowly went home. Chapter 8. The town was curiously bright in the late sunlight. This was one of the painted days peculiar to the region. They came in a row after the first frost, and happy the foreign tourists who visited Padugrad at such a time. The mud left by the recent rains made one's mouth water, so rich did it look. The house fronts on one side of the streets were bathed in an amber light which brought out every detail. Some displayed mosaic designs. The principal city bank, for instance, had seraphs amid a yucca-like flora. On the fresh blue paint of the boulevard benches, children had made with their fingers the words, "Glory to Paduk," a sure way of enjoying the properties of the sticky substance without getting one's ears twisted by the policeman, whose strange smile indicated the quandary in which he found himself. A ruby-red toy balloon hung in the cloudless sky. Grimy chimney sweeps and flour-powdered baker boys were fraternizing in open cafes, where they drowned their ancient feud in cider and grenadine. A man's rubber overshoe and a blood-stained cuff lay in the middle of the sidewalk, and passers-by gave them a wide berth without, however, slowing down or looking at those two articles, or indeed revealing their awareness of them in any way beyond stepping off the curb into the mud and then stepping back on the sidewalk. The window of a cheap toy shop had been starred by a bullet, and as Krug approached, a soldier came out carrying a clean paper bag into which he proceeded to cram the overshoe and the cuff. You remove the obstacle and the chance resume a straight course. Ember never wore detachable cuffs, nor would have dared to jump out of a moving vehicle and run, and gasp and run and duck as that unfortunate person had done. This is becoming a nuisance. I must awake. The victims of my nightmares are increasing in numbers too fast, thought Krug as he walked ponderous, black-hatted, the overcoat flappily unbuttoned, the wide-brimmed felt hat in his hand. Weakness of habit. A former official, very ancien regime, old party, had avoided arrest or worse by slipping out from his genteel plush and dust apartment, Paragon Lane 4, and transferring his quarters to the dead elevator in the house where Krug dwelt. In spite of the not working sign on the door, that strange automaton, Adam Krug would invariably try to get in and would be met by the frightened face and white goatee of the harassed refugee. Fright, however, would at once be replaced by a worldly display of hospitality. The old fellow had managed to transform his narrow abode into quite a comfortable little den. He was neatly dressed and carefully shaven, with pardonable pride would show you such fixtures as, for example, an alcohol lamp and a trouser press. He was a baron. Krug boorishly refused the cup of coffee he was offered, and tramped up to his own flat. Hedron was waiting for him in David's room. He had been told of Krug's telephone call, had come at once. David did not want them to leave the nursery, and threatened to get out of bed if they did. Claudina brought the boy his supper, but he refused to eat. From the study to which Krug and Hedron retired, they could indistinctly hear him arguing with the woman. They discussed what could be done, planning a certain course of action, well knowing that neither this course nor any would avail. They both wanted to know why people of no political importance had been seized, though to be sure they might have guessed the answer. The simple answer was to be given them half an hour later. Incidentally, we are having another meeting on the 12th, remarked Hedron. I am afraid you are going to be the guest of honor again. Not I, said Krug. I shall not be there. Hedron carefully scooped out the black contents of his pipe into the bronze ashtray at his elbow. I must be getting back, he said with a sigh. Those Chinese delegates are coming to dinner. He was referring to a group of foreign physicists and mathematicians who had been invited to take part in a congress that had been called off at the last moment. Some of the least important members had not been notified of the cancellation and had come all the way for nothing. At the door just before leaving, he looked at the man in his head, with the hat in his hand, and said, I hope she did not suffer. Krug shook his head and hurriedly opened the door. The suitcase presented a remarkable spectacle. Gustav, now in full uniform, with a look of utter dejection on his swollen face, was sitting on the steps. 4 soldiers in various postures formed a martial bas-relief along the wall. Hedron was immediately surrounded and shown the order for this arrest. One of the men pushed Krug out of the way. There was a vague sort of scuffle, in the course of which Gustav lost his footing and bumpily fell down the steps, dragging Hedron after him. Krug tried to follow the soldiers downstairs, but was made to desist. The clatter subsided. One imagined the Baron cowering in the darkness of his unconventional hiding place and still not daring to believe that he remained uncaptured. Chapter 9. Holding your cupped hands together, dear, and progressing with the cautious and tremulous steps of tremendous age, although hardly 15, you crossed the porch, stopped, gently worked open the glass door by means of your elbow, made your way past the caparisoned grand piano, traversed the sequence of cool carnations into the rooms, found your aunt in La Chambre Violette. I think I want to have the whole scene repeated, yes, from the beginning. As you came up the stone steps of the porch, your eyes never left your cupped hands, the pink chink between the 2 thumbs. Oh, what were you carrying? Come on now. You wore a striped, dingy white and pale blue sleeveless jersey, a dark blue Girl Scout skirt, untidy orphan black stockings, and a pair of old chlorophyll-stained tennis shoes. Between the pillars of the porch, geometrical sunlight touched your reddish-brown bobbed hair, your plump neck, and the vaccination mark on your sunburned arm. You moved slowly through a cool and sonorous drawing room, then entered a room where the carpet and armchairs and curtains were purple and blue. From various mirrors your cupped hands and lowered head came towards you, and your movements were mimicked behind your back. Your aunt, a lay figure, was writing a letter. Look, you said, very slowly, rose-wise, as you opened your hands. There, clinging with all its 6 fluffy feet to the ball in your thumb, the tip of its mouse-gray body slightly excurved, its short red, blue ocellated inferior wings oddly protruding forward from beneath the sloping superior ones, which were long and marbled and deeply notched. I think I shall have you go through your act a 3rd time, but in reverse, carrying that hawk moth back to the orchard where you found it. As you went the way you had come, now with the palm of your hand open, the sun had been lying in a state on the parquetry in the drawing room, and on the flat tiger, spread-eagled and bright-eyed beside the piano, leaped at you, climbed the dingy soft rungs of your jersey, and struck you right in the face so all you could see. Crowding, tier upon tier in the sky, jostling one another, pointing, feasting their eyes on the young Rada-Barbara, its high color and fiery freckles, and the hot cheeks as red as the hind wings basally, for the moth was still clinging to your hand, and you were still looking at it as you progressed toward the garden, where you gently transferred it to the lush grass at the foot of an apple tree, far from the beady eyes of your little sister. Where was I at the time? An 18-year-old student, sitting with a book, as pensees, I imagine, on a station bench, miles away, not knowing you, not known to you. Presently I shut the book, and took what was called an omnibus train to the country place where young Hedron was spending the summer. There was a cluster of rentable cottages on a hillside overlooking the river, the opposite bank of which revealed in terms of fir trees and alder bushes the heavily timbered acres of your aunt's estate. We shall now have somebody else arrive from nowhere. A pas de loup, a tall boy with the little black mustache and other signs of hot, uncomfortable puberty. Not I, not Hedron. That summer we did nothing but play chess. The boy was your cousin, and while my comrade and I, across the river, pored over Tarash's collection of annotated games, he would drive you to tears during meals by some intricate and maddening piece of teasing, and then under the pretense of reconciliation would steal after you into some attic where you were hiding your frantic sobbing, and there would kiss your wet eyes and hot neck and tumbled hair and try to get at your armpits and garters, for you were a remarkably big, ripe girl for your age, that he, in spite of his fine looks and hungry, hard limbs, died of consumption a year later. And still later, when you were 20 and I 23, we met at a Christmas party and discovered that we had been neighbors that summer 5 years before. 5 years lost. and at the precise moment when, in awed surprise, awed by the bungling of destiny, you put your hand to your mouth and looked at me with very round eyes and muttered, "But that's where I lived!" I recalled in a flash a green lane near an orchard, and a sturdy young girl carefully carrying a lost fluffy nestling, but whether it had been really you, no amount of probing and poking could either confirm or disprove. Fragment from a letter addressed to a dead woman in heaven by her husband in his cups. Chapter 10. He got rid of her furs, of all her photographs, of her huge English sponge and a supply of lavender soap, of her umbrella, of her napkin ring, of the little porcelain owl she had brought for Ember but never given him. She refused to be forgotten. When some 15 years before both his parents had been killed in a railway accident, he had managed to alleviate the pain of panic by writing Chapter 3, and later editions of his Microconceptia, wherein he looked straight into the eye sockets of death and called him a dog and an abomination. With one strong shrug of his burly shoulders, he shook off the burden of sanctity enveloping the monster, and as with a thump of great explosions of dust, the thick old mats and carpets and things fell, he had experienced a kind of hideous relief. But could he do it again? Here dresses and stockings and hats and shoes mercifully disappeared together with Claudina when the latter, soon after Hedron's arrest, was bullied by police agents into leaving. The agencies he called in an attempt to find a trained nurse to replace her could not help him, but a couple of days after Claudina had gone, the bell rang, and there on the landing was a very young girl with a suitcase offering her services. "I answer," she amusingly said, "to the name of Mariette." She had been employed as a maid and a model in the household of a well-known artist who had lived in apartment 30, right above Krug, but now he was obliged to depart with his wife and 2 other painters for a much less comfortable prison camp in a remote province. Mariette brought down a second suitcase and quietly moved into the room near the nursery. She had good references from the Department of Public Health, graceful legs, and a pale, definitely shaped, not particularly pretty but attractively childish face, with parched-looking lips always parted, and strange, lustreless dark eyes. The pupil almost merged in tint with the iris, which was placed somewhat higher than is usual and was obliquely shaded by sooty lashes. No paint or powder touched her singularly bloodless, even translucent cheeks. She wore her hair long. Krug had confused feeling that he had seen her before, probably on the stairs. Cinderella, the little Saturn, moving and dusting in a dream, always ivory pale and unspeakably tired after last night's ball. On the whole, there was something rather irritating about her, and her wavy brown hair had a strong chestnutty smell, but David liked her, so she might do after all. Chapter 11. On his birthday, Krug was informed by telephone that the head of the state desired to grant him an interview, and hardly had the fuming philosopher laid down the receiver than the door flew open, and very much like one of those stage ballets that march in stiffly half a second before the fictitious master, insulted and perhaps beaten up by then between acts, claps his hands, a dapper heel-clicking aide-de-camp saluted from the threshold. By the time the palace motor car, a huge black limousine which made one think of first-class funerals in alabaster cities, arrived at its destination, Krug's annoyance had given way to a grim curiosity. Though otherwise fully dressed, he was wearing bedroom slippers, and the 2 gigantic janitors whom Paducah had inherited, together with the abject Caratids supporting the balconies, stared at his absent-minded feet as he shuffled up the marble steps. From then on, a multitude of uniformed rascals kept silently seething around him, causing him to follow this or that course by means of a bodiless, elastic pressure, rather than by definite gestures of words. He was steered into a waiting room where, instead of the usual magazines, one was offered various games of skill, such as, for instance, glass gadgets, within which little bright, hopelessly mobile balls had coaxed into the orbits of eyeless clowns. Presently 2 masked men came in and searched him thoroughly. Then one of them retired behind the screen, while the other produced a small vial marked HSO, which he proceeded to conceal under Krug's left armpit. Having had Krug assume a natural position, he called his companion, who approached with an eager smile and immediately found the object, upon which he accused of having peeped through Kwazinka, a slit between the folding parts of a screen. A rapidly mounting squabble was stopped by the arrival of a Zimbro chamberlain. This prim old personage noticed at once that Krug had inadequately slawed, therefore a feverish search through the oppressive vastness of the palace. A small collection of foot gear began accumulating around Krug, a number of seedy-looking pumps, a girl's tiny slipper trimmed with moth-eaten squirrel fur, some blood-stained arctics, brown shoes, black shoes, and even a pair of half boots with screwed-on skates. Only the last fitted Krug, and some more time elapsed before adequate hands and instruments were found to deprive the soles of their rusty but gracefully curved supplements. Then the Zimmerl ushered Krug into the presence of Minister Dvorza, a von Embit of German extraction. Embit at once pronounced himself a humble admirer of Krug's genius. This might have been formed by Mirconceptia, he said. Moreover, a cousin of his had been a student of Professor Krug's, a famous physician. Was he any relation? He wasn't. The minister kept up the social patter for a few minutes. He had quite a queer way of emitting a quick little snort before saying something, and then took Krug by the arm, and they walked down a long passage with doors on one side and a stretch of pale green and Spanish green tapestry on the other, displaying what seemed to be an endless hunt through a subtropical forest. The visitor was made to inspect various rooms, i.e. his guide would softly open the door, in a reverent whisper direct his attention to this or that interesting item. The first room to be shown contained a contour map of the state made of bronze with towns and villages represented by precious and semi-precious stones of various colors. In the next, a young typist was poring over the contents of some documents, and so absorbed was she in deciphering them, and so noiselessly had the minister entered, that she emitted a wild shriek when he snorted behind her back. Then a classroom was visited. A score of brown-skinned Armenian and Sicilian lads were diligently writing at rosewood desks, while there Enog, a fat old man with dyed hair and bloodshot eyes, sat in front of them, painting his fingernails and yawning with closed mouth. Of special interest was a perfectly empty room in which some extinct furniture had left squares of honey-yellow color on the brown floor. Von Emmett lingered there and played Krug longer, and mutely pointed to the vacuum cleaner, and lingered on, eyes moving this way and that as if flitting over sacred treasures on an ancient chapel. But something even more curious than that was kept pour la bonne bouche, notamment une grande pièce bien claire, with chairs and tables of a clean-cut laboratory type, and what looked like an especially large and elaborate radio set. From this machine came a steady thumping sound not unlike that of an African drum, and 3 doctors in white were engaged in checking the number of beats per minute. In their turn, 2 violent-looking members of Paduk's bodyguard controlled the doctors by keeping count separately. A pretty nurse was reading flung roses in a corner, and Paduk's private physician, an enormous baby-faced man in a dusty-looking frock coat, was fast asleep behind a projection screen. Thump, ah, went the machine, and every now and then there was an additional systole, causing a slight break in the rhythm. The owner of the heart to the amplified beatings of the experts were listening, and was in the study of some 50 feet away. His guardian soldiers, all leather and cartridges, carefully examined Krug's and von Embit's papers. The latter gentleman had forgotten to provide himself with a photostat of his birth certificate, and so could not pass, much to his good-natured discomfiture. Krug went in alone. Paduk, clothed in a carbuncle to bunion and field grey, stood with his hands behind his back and his back to the reader. He stood, thus oriented and clothed, before a bleak French widow. Ragged clouds rode the white sky, and the window pane rattled slightly. The room, alas, had been formerly a ballroom. A good deal of stucco ornamentation enlivened the walls. The few chairs that floated about in the mirrory wilderness were gilt. So was the radiator. One corner of the room was cut off by a great writing desk. "Here I am," said Krug. Paduk wheeled around and, without looking at his visitor, marched to the desk. There he sank in a leathern armchair. Krug, whose left shoe had begun to hurt, sought a seat, and not finding one in the vicinity of the table, looked back at the gilt chairs. His host, however, saw that there was a click and a replica of Paduk's Klubsessel armchair jack-in-the-box from a trap near the desk. Physically, the toad had hardly changed, except that every particle of his visible organism had been expanded and rough-ended. On top of his bumpy, bluish, shaven head, a patch of hair was neatly brushed and parted. His botched complexion was worse than ever, and one wondered what tremendous willpower a man must possess to refrain from squeezing out the blackheads that clogged the coarse pores on and near the wings of his fattish nose. His upper lip was disfigured by a scar. A bit of porous plaster adhered to the side of his chin, and a still larger bit, with a soiled corner and turned back and pad of cotton awry, could be seen in the fold of his neck just above the stiff collar of his semi-military coat. In a word, he was a little too repulsive to be credible, and so let us ring the bell held by a bronze eagle and have him beautified by a mortician. Now the skin is thoroughly cleansed and is assumed a smooth marchpane color. A glossy wig with auburn and blonde tresses, artistically intermixed, covers his head. Pink paint has dealt with the unseemly scar. Indeed, it would be an admirable face if he were to close his eyes for him. But no matter what pressure we exert upon the lids, they snap open again. I never noticed his eyes, or else his eyes have changed. They were those of a fish in a neglected aquarium, muddy, meaningless eyes, and moreover the poor man was in a state of morbid embarrassment at being in the same room with big, heavy Adam Krug. You wanted to see me? What is your trouble? What is your truth? People always want to see me and talk of their troubles and truths. I am tired. The world is tired. We are both tired. The trouble of the world is mine. I tell them to tell me their troubles. What do you want? This little speech was delivered in a slow, flat, toneless mumble, and having delivered it to Paduk bent his head and stared at his hands. What remained of his fingernails looked like thin springs sunk deep in the yellowish flesh. Well, said Krug, if you put it like this, Dragochini, my precious, I think I want a drink. The telephone emitted a discreet tinkle. Paduk attended to it. His cheek twitched as he listened, then he handed the receiver to Krug, who comfortably clasped it and said, Yes. Professor, said the telephone, this is merely a suggestion. The chief of the state is not generally addressed as Dragochini. I see, said Krug, stretching out one leg. By the way, will you please send up some brandy? Wait a bit. He looked interrogatively at Paduk, who had made a somewhat ecclesiastical and Gallic gesture of lassitude and disgust, raising both hands and letting them sink again. One brandy and a glass of milk, said Krug, and hung up. More than 25 years, Mukograd, said Paduk after a silence. You have remained what you were, but the world spins on. Gumakrad. Poor little Gumradka. And then, said Krug, the two proceeded to speak of old times, to remember the names of teachers and their idiosyncrasies, curiously the same throughout the ages, and what can be funnier than a habitual oddity? Come, Dragotsini. Come, sir, I know all that, and really we have more important things to discuss than snowballs and ink blots. You might regret it, said Paduk. Krug drummed for a while on his side of the desk. Then he fingered a long paper knife of ivory. The telephone rang again. Paduk listened. You are not supposed to touch knives here, he said to Krug, as with a sigh he replaced the receiver. Why did you want to see me? I did not. You did. Well, why did I? Do you know that, Mad Adam? Because, said Krug, I am the only person who can stand on the other end of the seesaw and make your end rise. Knuckles briskly rapped on the door, and Zimbrel marched in with a tinkling tray. He deftly served the two friends and presented a letter to Krug. Krug took a sip and read the note. Professor, it said, this is not the right manner. You should bear in mind that notwithstanding the narrow and fragile bridge of school memories uniting the two sides, these are separated in depth by an abyss of power and dignity, which even a great philosopher, and that is what you are, yes, sir, cannot hope to measure. You must not indulge in this atrocious familiarity. One has to warn you again. One beseeches you. Hoping that the shoes are not too uncomfortable, one remains a well-wisher. What? And that's that, said Krug. Paduk moistened his lips in the pasteurized milk and spoke in a huskier voice. Now let me tell you. They come and say to me, why is this good and intelligent man idle? Why is he not in the service of the state? And I answer, I don't know. And they are puzzled also. Who are they? Asked Krug dryly. Friends. Friends of the law, friends of the lawmaker, and village fraternities, the city clubs, and the great lodges. Why is it so? Why is he not with us? I only echo the query. The heck you do, said Krug. The door opened slightly and a fat gray parrot with a note in its beak walked in. It waddled towards the desk on clumsy, hoary legs, and its claws made the kind of sound that unmanicured dogs make on varnished floors. Paduk jumped out of his chair, walked rapidly towards the old bird, and kicked it like a football out of the room. Then he shut the door with a bang. The telephone was ringing its heart out on the desk. He disconnected the current and clapped the whole thing into a drawer. And now the answer, he said, which you owe me, said Krug. First of all, I wish to know why you had those 4 friends of mine arrested. Was it to make a vacuum around me, to leave me shivering in a void? The state is your only true friend. I see. Gray light from your long windows. The dreary wail of a tugboat. A nice picture we make. You as a kind of Erlkönig, and myself as the male baby clinging to the matter-of-fact rider and peering into the magic mists. Pah! All we want of you is that little part where the handle is. There is none, cried Krug, and hit his side of the table with his fist. I beseech you to be careful. The walls are full of camouflaged holes, each one with a rifle which is trained upon you. Please do not gesticulate. They are jumpy today. It's the weather, this grey minstratum. If, said Krug, you cannot leave me and my friends in peace, then let them and me go abroad. It would save you a world of trouble. What is it exactly you have against my government? I am not in the least interested in your government. What I resent is your attempt to make me interested in it. Leave me alone. Alone is the vilest word in the language. Nobody is alone. When a cell in an organism says, leave me alone, the result is cancer. In what prison or prisons are they kept? I beg your pardon? Where is Ember, for instance? You want to know too much. These are dull technical matters of no real interest to your type of mind. And no, it did not go on quite like that. In the first place, Paduk was silent during most of the interview. What he did say amounted to a few curt platitudes. To be sure, he did do some drumming on the desk. They all drum, and Krug retaliated with some of his own drumming. But otherwise, neither showed nervousness. Photographed from above, they would have come out in Chinese perspective, doll-like, a little limp, but possibly with a hard wooden core. Under their plausible clothes, one slumped at his desk in a shaft of gray light, the other seated sideways onto the desk, legs crossed, the toe of the upper foot moving up and down, and the secret spectator, some anthropomorphic deity, for example, surely would be amused by the shape of the human head seen from above. Paduk curtly asked Krug whether Krug's apartment were warm enough. Nobody, of course, could have expected a revolution without a shortage of coal, and Krug said yes, it was. And did he have any trouble in getting milk and radishes? Well, yes, a little. He made a note of Krug's answer on a calendar slip. He had learned with sorrow of Krug's bereavement. Was Professor Martin Krug a relative of his? Were there any relatives on his late wife's side? Krug supplied him with the necessary data. Paduk leaned back in his chair and tapped his nose with the rubber end of his six-faceted pencil. As his thoughts took a different course, he changed the position of the pencil. He now held it by the end horizontally, rolling it slightly between the finger and thumb of either hand, seemingly interested in the disappearance and reappearance of the ever-heard Faber number 2.3 by 8. It is not a difficult part, but still, 3/8. It is not a difficult part, but still the actor must be careful not to overdo what Graf somewhere calls villainous deliberation. Krug in the meantime sipped his brandy and tenderly nursed the glass. Suddenly Paduk plunged toward his desk. A drawer shot out. Bare-boned typescript was produced. This he handed to Krug. I must put on my spectacles, said Krug. He held them before his face and looked through them at a distant window. The left glass showed a dim spiral nebula in the middle of not unlike the imprint of a ghostly thumb. While he breathed upon it and rubbed it away with his handkerchief, Paduk explained matters. Krug was to be nominated college president in place of Azurius. His salary would be 3 times that of his predecessor, who had been 5,000 kroons. Moreover, he would be provided with a motor car, a bicycle, and a pedograph. At the public opening of the university, he would kindly deliver a speech. His works would be republished in new editions, revised in the light of political events. There might be bonuses, sabbatical years, lottery tickets, a cow, lots of things. And this, I presume, is the speech, said Krug cozily. Paduk remarked that in order to save Krug the trouble of composing it, the speech had been prepared by an expert. We hope you will like it as well as we do. So this, repeated Krug, is a speech. Yes, said Paduk. Now take your time, read it carefully. Oh, by the way, there was one word to be changed. I wonder if that has been done. Will you please? He stretched his hand to make the typescript from Krug, and in so doing he knocked down the tumbler of milk with his elbow. What was left of the milk made a kidney-shaped white puddle on the desk. Yes, said Paduk, handing the typescript back. It has been changed. He busied himself when removing various things from the desk, a bronze eagle, a pencil, a picture postcard of Gainsborough's Blue Boy, and a framed reproduction of Aldo Brandini's wedding of the half-naked, wreathed, adorable minion, whom the groom is obliged to renounce for the sake of a lumpy, muffled-up bride, and then messily dabbed at the milk with a piece of blotting paper. Krug read sotto voce, Ladies and gentlemen, citizens, soldiers, wives and mothers, brothers and sisters, the revolution has brought to the fore problems, Zadachi, of unusual difficulty, of colossal importance, of worldwide scope. Marovovo Mastaba. Our leader has restored to most resolute revolutionary measures calculated to arouse the unbounded heroism of the oppressed and exploited masses, and the shortest Kratashaishi time stroke, the state has created central organs for providing the country with all the most important products, which are to be distributed at fixed prices in a planful manner. Wives, soldiers, and mothers, the hydra of the reaction, may still raise its head. This won't do. The creature has more heads than one, has it not? Make a note of it, said Paduk through his teeth. Make a note in the margin, for goodness sake, go on. As our old proverb has it, the ugliest wives are the truest, but surely this cannot apply to the ugly rumors which our enemies are spreading. It is rumored, for instance, that the cream of our intelligentsia is opposed to the present regime. Wouldn't whipped cream be fitter? I mean, pursuing the metaphor. Make a note, make a note. These details do not matter. Untrue, a mere phrase, an untruth. Those who rage, storm, fulminate, gnash their teeth, pour a ceaseless stream, potok, of abusive words upon us, do not accuse us of anything directly. They only insinuate. This insinuation is stupid. Far from opposing the regime, we professors, writers, philosophers, and so forth support it with all possible learning and enthusiasm. No, gentlemen, no, traitors. Your most categorical words, declarations, and notes will not diminish these facts. You may gloss over the fact that our foremost professors and thinkers support the regime, but you cannot dismiss the fact that they do support it. We are happy and proud to match with the masses. Blind matter regains the use of its eyes and knocks off the rosy spectacles which used to adorn the long nose of so-called thought. Whatever I have thought and written in the past, one thing is clear to me now, no matter to whom they belong. Two pairs of eyes looking at a boot see the same boot is identically reflected in both, and further, that the larynx is the seat of thought, so that the working of the mind is a kind of gargling. Well, this last sentence seems to be a garbled passage from one of my works, a passage turned inside out by somebody who did not understand the gist of my remarks. I was criticizing that old, please go on, please. In other words, the new education, the university, which I am happy and proud to direct, will inaugurate the era of dynamic living. In result, a great and beautiful simplification will replace the evil refinements of a degenerate past. We shall teach and learn, first of all, that the dream of Plato has come true in the hands of the head of our state. This is sheer drivel. I refuse to go on. Take it away. He pushed the typescript toward Paduk, who sat with closed eyes. Do not make any hasty decisions, Mad Adam. Go home. Think it over. Nay, do not speak. They cannot hold their fire much longer. Pithy, go. Which, of course, terminated the interview. Thus, or perhaps in some other way, did Krug really glance at the prepared speech? And if he did, was it really as silly as all that? He did. It was. The seedy tyrant, or the president of the state, or the director, or whoever he was, the man Paduk in a word, the toad in another, did hand my favorite character a mysterious batch of neatly typed pages. The actor playing the recipient should be taught not to look at his hand while he takes the papers very slowly, keeping those lateral low-jaw muscles in movement, please, but to stare straight at the giver. In short, look at the giver first, then lower your eyes to the gift. But both were clumsy and cross men, and the experts in the cardarium exchanged solemn nods at a certain point, when the milk was upset, and they too were not acting. Tentatively scheduled to take place in 3 months' time, the opening of the new university was to be a most ceremonious and widely publicized affair, with a host of reporters from foreign countries, ignorant, overpaid correspondents with noiseless little typewriters in their laps, and photographers with souls as cheap dried figs. And the one great thinker in the country would appear in scarlet robes, click, besides the chief symbol of the state, click, 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 and proclaim in a thundering voice that the state was bigger and wiser than any mortal could be.